Hey everybody, Smart Silver Stacker here. So it looks like I may have pulled a bit of a Jim Cramer when I was calling for a potential drop in the price of precious metals following yesterday's FOMC press conference. I was expecting some hawkish jawboning to come from the Fed chair, but what we ended up getting was a surprisingly dovish Powell. At least markets and investors certainly interpreted what Powell had to say as dovish, judging from the rally that we had across the board in all the major stock indexes and also in gold and silver. Now, this did go contrary to what many market analysts had been expecting, including Michael Berry, who the night before the press conference had tweeted the ominous one-word message, sell. And it looks like Berry has actually deleted his Twitter account following yesterday's rally. I guess the amount of trolling that he was subject to after that call and the subsequent rally, it was just too much to bear. Now, I will say that although Powell's talking points are being interpreted as dovish, if you listen to the press conference, to me it seemed like a bit of a mixed bag, with Powell sprinkling in some hawkish rhetoric there with his rosy talk about how well disinflation is now moving along. And one thing that he did say that really caught my attention was at one point, Powell discussed the scenario of inflation falling too fast if the Fed, has over-tightened. And he said that in that scenario, the Fed does have tools to act, and I can only assume that he was referring to either rate cuts or more quantitative easing. So clearly, the Fed has not abandoned that part of their toolbox, and I do think that it is inevitable that eventually we are going to see the Fed return to their easy money policies, probably when something major in the economy breaks. Also, at the time that I'm recording this video, it's around noon, it looks like that post-FOMC rally is starting to get a little bit shaky because right now it's kind of a mixed bag in stocks. The Dow's in the red, the S&P and the NASDAQ are in the green, and if we take a look at the metals charts, courtesy of SD Bullion, we can see that the metals have also given up most of their gains. So who knows? Maybe by the end of the week, by the end of trading tomorrow, my forecast of a pullback in the metals may in fact still come to pass. Time will tell. But in today's video, I don't want to get too bogged down analyzing what Powell said following the FOMC and in that press conference. Instead, I want to focus on what another prominent investor, pundit, and author had to say about markets recently, specifically about silver. So stick around because I don't think you're going to want to miss this one. And speaking of silver, today's video is brought to you by silverbotanicals.com and their excellent line of household and personal hygiene products powered by nano silver. You can check them out with the link down in the description, and don't forget to use coupon code STACKER to save 10% on your order. So the investor that I'm referring to is none other than Robert Kiyosaki, author of Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And this is his tweet from yesterday that I want to dive into and give you my take on. Been saying buy silver for years. Silver best because silver worst commodity for 50 years. Gold-silver ratio usually 1:15. That means 1 ounce of gold buys 15 ounces of silver. January 2023, 1 ounce of gold buys 80 ounces of silver. Cheap, almost 1:100. Silver going up. EVs, solar, greenies love silver. FOMO. Now let's go ahead and break down what he said here, and I'm going to give you my take on each part of this tweet. The first part, he said, been buying silver for years, and the reason is that it's been the worst performing commodity for 50 years. And, I hear this a lot in the comments on my videos. Comments like, I've been hearing this for years. You stackers have been singing the same tune for decades. Or, silver's cheaper now than it was in the 80s. Why would I want to stack it now? And, I think that this is actually spot on, the contrarian case for silver. The metal is incredibly undervalued at today's prices, and whether that's because of some kind of manipulation or maybe just because investors have incredibly poor perceptions of the metal as an investment, either way, it makes accumulating physical metal at these prices an incredible opportunity. If you ask me, this isn't financial advice, it's just my take on things. Now, the second part of that tweet, when Kiyosaki said the gold to silver ratio is usually 1:15. That means 1 ounce of gold buys 15 ounces of silver. Well, we can take a look at this long-term chart of the gold to silver ratio, and you can see that, for hundreds of years, the ratio was 1:15 or close to that. But the real reason that ratio didn't change at all for so long was because of artificial pegs and the bimetallic monetary systems that countries were operating at that time. Although, it is interesting to note that the mining ratio of the metals is lower even than 1 to 15. And I don't remember the exact number. If you do know it, put it down in the comments. And also, the above ground supply of gold is actually larger than that of silver. And the reason for that is because almost all of the gold that has ever been mined is still around in one form or another. But a lot of the silver that has been consumed by industry is sitting in landfills in forms that, at least at today's prices, are simply not economical to recycle and recover. Now, despite the fact that I don't think that the 1 to 15 ratio is necessarily coming back anytime soon, a gold to silver ratio near 80 is still at the very high end of the range, and when it is this high, it rarely stays this high for long. When the gold to silver ratio gets this high, it is a sign that either gold needs to depreciate or silver needs to put on some gains to normalize the situation. Now, this third part of the tweet about how electric vehicles, solar panels, and green tech in general love silver, this is all true. All of this high-tech green energy that we are moving towards, it consumes a ton of silver. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that silver is the most electrically conductive of all of the metals. And yes, I know that the green tech, it probably is never going to fully replace fossil fuels, and maybe it's not even as efficient as fossil fuels, at least at the current level of technology, but still, we are going to see a lot more of it. We are moving in that direction because government subsidies and regulation, they're going to incentivize it heavily. And that means a lot of silver is going to be needed in the near future. So overall, I don't agree with everything that Kiyosaki says here about the gold to silver ratio, but other than that, I think he's pretty much right on point. And while we're on the subject of Robert Kiyosaki's tweets, there's another one from January 31st that really got me thinking that I'd like to touch on. So he wrote, question, why are gold, silver, and Bitcoin going higher? Answer, because U.S. poor and middle class getting poorer and deeper in bad debt. Please don't get poorer, at least buy one silver coin. Only $30 and start to get richer. And I will say that yes, we have a huge debt problem, and it's not just among the poor and the middle class. This is among all Americans, poor, rich, middle class, government, corporations, students, workers. Everyone has way too much debt. And the reason for that is because the Fed's easy money policies for the past decade plus with the artificially low interest rates have incentivized just about every market participant to take on these massive onerous levels of indebtedness. And it is likely going to be a debt crisis that ultimately crashes the dollar and sends precious metals soaring, because all of this debt, the $31.5 trillion of government debt, the $170 plus trillion of unfunded liabilities, the record student debt, the record credit card debt, all of this debt, ultimately it can only be paid off in devalued currency. And when faced with a choice between default and inflation, we know what the Fed and the government are going to do. Just listen to the deliberations that are ongoing about the debt ceiling, or even, when Powell touched on the subject of the debt ceiling at the FOMC press conference yesterday, the way that the politicians and the bankers talk about this is as if Armageddon would occur if a default takes place. Now, if you ask me, default at this point is really the only option, but the can will be kicked down the road indefinitely until a default by another name takes place, and that is massive currency debasement. Because, of course, to a creditor, being paid in worthless currency that can't buy anything, really, it's just as bad as not getting paid at all. But I suppose the optics are a bit better, perhaps, at least in the short term. So, yeah, I think Kiyosaki is right about silver and debt. But the thing that really got me thinking in that tweet was when he said that everyone should buy at least one silver coin. I mean, just imagine if every American went out and did that. It would only cost about $30. Now, I know that these days, 57% of Americans can't even pay a $1,000 emergency expense, but at least I think most could come up with $30 to drop on a 1-ounce round or coin. And for those who simply cannot afford it, I'm sure that some of us stackers out there would be happy to pick up the slack. But really, just imagine if everyone did that. The US alone has 334 million people nowadays. Just compare that to the latest numbers from the Comex, courtesy of Mike Say98 on Twitter, who posts all these great infographics for us. You can see that the registered silver is a mere 32.2 million ounces. And the vault totals, all the silver they've got, is only 291.5 million ounces. Now, you also have to keep in mind that according to the CME Group themselves, about 50% of the eligible silver, or 130 million ounces, isn't even actually available for delivery, and somebody already has a claim on it. So what we're talking about here is 161 million ounces of physical silver over at the Comex. And so you can see that every American buying a 1 ounce coin, it would clear out the Comex not once, but twice over. Kind of makes you think, right? Like maybe the silver squeeze is something that we are actually going to see here at some point. And I'm personally fairly confident that we will see that event. In fact, I think it might even be inevitable. It's just a matter of when it's going to happen. That's a bit harder to call, but if every American went out and spent the price of a tank of gas on silver one time, it would happen almost immediately. It also makes you realize how few people must actually be holding hard currency, physical silver bullion. Because when you look at the size of the population compared to how much bullion is available, and then when you see how much silver some of the stackers in this community have, my stack pales in comparison to some of the stuff you see people sharing. In order for those stackers to accumulate those thousands and thousands of ounces, how many people must have literally no metal at all? So I do think that Robert Kiyosaki is onto something here. Now, I know a lot of people might not be huge fans of his. To be fair, he is a bit out there sometimes, but he did write Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and I will say that personally, as a young man, that was one of the first books that helped to snap me out of my monetary indoctrination. I grew up in a family where we really rarely discussed money or finance, and I did find Kiyosaki's book helpful to just get me thinking about the subject. And so, on a personal level, I do kind of like the guy. So what are your thoughts on this idea of everyone buying a 1 ounce silver coin? Maybe we can get a hashtag going, something like hashtag just 1 ounce. I don't know. Leave me a comment down below to let me know what you think. But thanks for watching, everybody. Do appreciate you tuning into these videos, and I will catch you next time. Stay safe and happy stacking. Smart Silver Stacker, out.